There's a word people reach for when they can't explain their own resistance. Lazy. And it shows up quietly at first. You notice the thing that you said that you were going to do, still sitting there. The project that you care about, the calls you meant to make, the change you keep thinking about. And somewhere in the background, that voice starts whispering, why can't you just do it? So the label arrives. Lazy. But I want to slow down for just a moment, because most of the time, laziness isn't actually what's happening. Most of the time, what people are feeling is misalignment. And misalignment has a very different texture. It looks like resistance that doesn't quite make sense. Fatigue that shows up even when you're rested. A strange heaviness around things that should feel simple. And you sit down to begin something, and instead of movement, there's friction. And it's not because you don't care, but because something about the direction itself doesn't fit. Most of us were taught to treat resistance as a character flaw. To push harder or try harder, discipline yourself more. And to be clear, not every form of resistance is misalignment. Sometimes our brains just work differently. Sometimes exhaustion is real. Sometimes attention or stress, depression, or neurodivergence makes even simple things harder to start. Those realities matter. But even inside those realities, there are still moments when resistance is pointing to something deeper. And that's the part most of us were never taught to examine. Alignment doesn't mean everything feels easy. That's a common misunderstanding. Alignment work can still be difficult. Aligned relationships can and will still require effort. Aligned growth can still feel uncomfortable, but the kind of effort is different. When you're aligned, effort feels like movement. When you're misaligned, effort feels like dragging something uphill. And most people don't notice the difference. So they assume that the problem must be them. And here's the difficult part. Sometimes misalignment asks something uncomfortable from us. It asks us to look at where we're trying to live a life that no longer fits, a role that we've outgrown, and an expectation that we've inherited, or a direction we agreed to before we knew ourselves well enough to choose it. And some of us have been carrying that for a long time. Showing up, performing, doing the thing well enough that no one questioned it, including us, until something starts to shift. Not loudly, just a quiet withdrawal of energy from a life that used to feel like yours. And instead of questioning the path, we question ourselves. We hand ourselves that label, laziness, like it explains something, when what we're actually feeling is the strain of forcing ourselves into a shape that no longer belongs to us. There's a quiet moment that happens for a lot of people when this starts to become clear. Not dramatic, just honest. The moment you realize you're not avoiding the work, you're avoiding the misfit. The part of your life that requires you to keep pretending something feels right when it doesn't. And that realization can feel relieving and confronting, because once you see it, you can't really unsee it. Alignment doesn't appear overnight. It's usually something we discover slowly through attention, through small corrections, through being honest about what drains us and what quietly brings us back to life. And sometimes the most important shift is simply changing the question. Instead of asking, why am I so lazy? You start asking, where am I out of alignment? And that question changes everything because it moves the focus away from self-judgment and toward understanding. And understanding is where real change actually begins. Sometimes the problem isn't that you don't have a discipline. Sometimes the problem is that you're trying to build a life that doesn't fit the person you're becoming. And no amount of discipline can make misalignment feel right. So if something in your life keeps resisting you, before you call yourself lazy, it might be worth asking a different question. What part of this no longer belongs to me? Stay with yourself there and continue traveling. If this feeling is where you are right now, the next step isn't fixing your life. It's understanding where you are. And that's where we begin.